My name is Monk Rowe for the Phillies Jazz Archive, and I'm very privileged to have Carmen Lundy with me this afternoon for me, and good morning to you.
Good morning, Monk.
I had planned out an introduction, and then this morning I was reading Scott Yanow, Jazz Singers, The Ultimate Guide, which you are in. And so I'm going to read Scott's description. It said, Carmen Lundy's voice is deep, versatile, and very appealing. She's a masterful yet subtle improviser, writes high-quality music, some of which should become future standards, arranges for her band, and puts on intriguing performances. And I might add, she's a multi-instrumentalist, a mixed media artist, and an actress.
Yes, and I just won my first film festival award.
All right. And I should add, you're a joy to watch on stage. This morning I was watching the event from Madrid.
Live at Madrid, yeah.
Yes, and your physical movements to the music are, let's say, highly appropriate. So, can you remember a time when you were young, when the first time that you thought, I'm going to be a musician?
I can recall the first time I knew that it was going to be my life's the goal and that it was going to be my life's work. But I don't know if it was necessarily that I was going to be a musician. I was already a musician when I decided that I was going to make it my profession. I was already a musician by then. So I guess the decision to really pursue this was around the age of 11 or 12. But I had already been playing piano for a good 6-7 years prior to that.
And accompanying yourself?
Yes.
So your mother was a member of a apostolic, sorry, I didn't say it correctly.
That's okay. People say apostolic, and that's perfectly
Apostolic
fine.
Christian church. And was there a part of their doctrine that addressed popular music? Was it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. When I mentioned a second ago that I won this award for Best Documentary Film, it was actually a film about my mother's gospel group, the Apostolic Singers, as we call it, of Miami. And that's kind of a branch of the Pentecostal teaching in Christianity. Okay, the apostolic faith is sort of under this Pentecostal thing. And while we, my family, everyone in my family sings, plays an instrument, something. And my grandfather played violin and guitar. He was the one that started the Apostolic Singers. He and his brother built the little community that was part of where I grew up, Perrine, Florida, Richmond Heights, Florida. That's all kind of south of Coral Gables and Coconut Grove. So this area, I was born in the mid-50s. So this area was predominantly Black, although we were very much a cosmopolitan and international city at the time. Miami Beach, some of my first gigs were on Miami Beach. This particular branch of Pentecostal faith frowns upon any connection whatsoever to making money as a musician, to actually earning money as a musician. It's sort of there's a bit of a conflict, a bit of a, what is that word that you use when you're kind of contradictory? Where if you have a gift and you receive this gift from God and you don't use it, you'll lose it. Okay, there's that one teaching. But we mean for you to use it like this. You can use it, but you use it like this. So we're not encouraged to take money. We can get in the car and drive for, hundreds of miles and sing our hearts out and play and get everybody saved and, make revivals and things. And, maybe they'll take up an offering to make sure you have gas money to get home. But that's not the same thing as paying you for your offering, your service through the music. This was a this still is very much a part of the teaching, and has been a conflict for most of my life. And unfortunately, to this day, I still have to confront that personally in my personal family life. And it's a very, very sad truth. So the answer to your question is yes. There are, I have an aunt who's in this film. It's called Nothing But the Blood. And she was my first real piano teacher without being my piano teacher because physically, because she was the accompanist for the Apostolic Singers when I was about 4 or 5 years old, and she still does it. And she's in the film, and she's still accompanying. She was at church Sunday somewhere playing for someone, okay? And she's 82 now. And she still has issues with that. She still confronts at this time in her life, with all of that skill, being able to simply receive payment for her work. And I've encouraged her in the last maybe 20 years to just allow herself, give herself permission to just be rewarded, however people choose to.
Did your mother, when you decided to go to music school, I guess University of Miami, was it?
Yes.
Obviously, if you're going to make that commitment, you're saying that I'm going to make a career and I'm going to need to get paid. Did she object to that?
No, not at all. My father did. It was my father, not my mother.
Okay.
It is my mother who's responsible for this beautiful experience I have in life and having seen the world. And without her encouragement, and without her creating and finding every possible way to make this happen, I wouldn't be talking to you.
Oh. Well, thanks to your mom.
Thanks, Mom.
Yeah. Was there a particular reason that you switched from opera study to jazz?
When I got to the University of Miami, 2 things happened. I had become friends with a young accompanist in high school. His name is Dave Roystein, who happens to be receiving a lifetime achievement at the University of Miami next week. But he's the head of the Cal Arts Music School Jazz Department here in Los Angeles. Now, David was the accompanist for the choir in high school. And when I asked him to play for me, because I was always the one playing for, some of my classmates for the talent shows, I asked him to play for me because I really wanted to step out and sing and not have to do this whole piano sing thing. And when he accompanied me, there was something so different about the sound of his piano than my piano. I had come from that gospel thing, second inversions and all that stuff. And David was playing major 7ths and 9ths, and I was like, what are you doing? So he was just sort of kind of like just a generous person, his nature. And he said, oh, I'm just, I'm studying Bill Evans right now, and I'm playing jazz piano, and I'm studying jazz piano. I'm like, what is that? So our friendship just blossomed from that. And by the time I got to the University of Miami, I was still in this, classical track. I was on this classical track. And David and I had formed a couple of little performances during that summer period before the freshman year. So we were just doing pop tunes that, for like in nursing homes and things like that, and he would bring his Fender Rhodes and set it up, and, we would do our thing, So right in that patch, he joined the University of Miami Youth Jazz Band, and they needed a vocalist. And that's what happened. So now I'm doing this like blood, sweat, and tears and, that kind of stuff. And now there's the freshman year of school. And I'm in this classical department, and I'm doing all of the arias, and I'm learning all this stuff. And it was great because I got wonderful vocal instruction that has allowed me to sustain a 50-year career. So thank you for that. But all of those, David was also at the University of Miami in the jazz department. We did not know that we were both ending up in the same university. We had no idea that this was happening to us. So when I got there, and maybe it was because I had sort of become familiar with some of the people during that summer, during the youth jazz band concerts, maybe a little, other things were kind of working themselves out for me. But I sustained this whole classical thing for the entire time I went to the University of Miami. But in the end, it was like the beginning of my sophomore year, I really wanted to do this jazz thing, but they didn't have a curriculum for jazz singers. So they allowed me, Jerry Coker, the head of the jazz department and the head of the classical department, allowed me to go into this study, but I had to do both. So I had this double music major. So now I'm staying in the classical, but I'm now adding courses that have to do with composition, jazz arranging, improvisation, and they really treated me that way. In other words, my instrument was voice, you see. So when it came time to improvise, it wasn't like they said, okay, do that on the piano. But now I'm taking jazz piano courses. I'm taking all these jazz courses, and I'm staying in the classical department. And I did both for the entire time. And I graduated as a jazz major. The curriculum for the jazz vocalist was established about 3 years after I left. So I kind of initiated this program without really, kind of having an intention to do so. But that's kind of that little space and time where it really was a natural course of events. I think the reason that I was allowed to do this is because a lot of the jazz classmates, that many of whom you know, if I called you to call their names, you would know them. They would ask me to do their songs that they had to write for that class assignment, or can you sing this? I wrote some lyrics for this, Carmen. Would you mind doing this tune for me? And the cool thing about it was, while I had a little familiarity with a lot of the standards, this original idea, singing this new song that my classmate wrote, I couldn't run to the library and find a version of it and kind of learn it based on the other vocalist rendition. You see, I actually had to learn it, and get inside the tune and perform it. So I was kind of forced to hear my own take on something. I was kind of in that place where it's the other, the other composer's idea that I'm working with on this new song that I'm kind of helping him to realize, he or she to realize what has been written. So that was kind of the osmosis part, I think.
Did the classical music voice teachers ever say to you, I don't like what I'm hearing. Where's this coming from? Are you doing jazz, or were you blessed with open-minded props?
Yes. Okay. Mary Henderson Buckley was my first voice teacher at the University of Miami. Mary Henderson Buckley, flat out, straight up classical voice, okay? And I studied with her for my first 2.5 years, or something like that. I mean, we're talking a while ago. And something interesting occurred. And the cool thing about Mary Henderson Buckley was she knew that I was kind of floating back and forth. And there's something called a jury, where every Friday at noon, classical vocalists, the jazz artists, you had to perform for the faculty. That was the way it was. And these juries were where I kind of got, they were allowing me to kind of present the other side of what I was exploring. So I would do the aria, and then I would do some other kind of pop tune or whatever. But the cool thing was, she knew David was in the musical, was upstairs in the jazz department, and she'd bring him in for some of my lessons to hear me work with the tune or whatever I was going to do, the non-classical tune. So it just so happened that her experience introduced her to musical theater. So she was very familiar with all of those tunes that jazz artists took from the theater and turned into jazz standards. Sorry, that's my ride cymbal.
Yeah.
So Mary Henderson Buckley was a super cool person, and she was a great teacher. And all we did was just really seriously work on my technique. And there was a portion of my lesson, a 90-minute lesson, where maybe the last 20, 30 minutes was where we kind of work on the song, work on the whatever it was, the aria, the jazz standard, whatever. So Mary Henderson was, I think she was very instrumental in talking them into allowing me to switch majors and go into the studio music and jazz major.
You said when you went to New York, you went there, you wanted to be a bona fide jazz singer. Did you have to pay dues in a other way? In other words, did you have to get a day job in order to pursue to pay for your calling?
I just realized this is 2023. I've been doing this consecutively for 50 years plus now, okay? And I've never done anything but music. Anything but music. Even if I were in some acting thing, I could sing. You know what I mean? There was a part where you had to sing something. So I was never not singing for a living. That's all I've ever done. I don't know the first thing about waiting tables, although I think I'm a pretty good chef myself, and I'm happy to invite people over and serve them. But I don't know anything, and it's kind of scary because it's a good thing that I have some background with this, and I've kind of developed a good, I think I'm a good teacher. I think I work well with young people, but I have no experience whatsoever out in the day job realm of life.
I'm guessing that accompanists, bass players, and piano players and guitar players like to work with you because I doubt you would ever call a tune that you didn't know your own key or have a chart on or an arrangement idea.
Absolutely. So when I moved to New York, it was the late 70s, okay? And there was a preparation for that. I was during my years at the University of Miami, I sang 6 nights a week, 3 sets, 9 o'clock to 1 o'clock, in any venue that would hire me. Most of the gigs that back then, when you booked a gig, it lasted for a year, or it lasted for at least at the minimum a month. And then some other artists would come in, and then you'd come back in the month, 2 months later, and it was like that sort of thing. So the way I kind of provided for myself during my university years was singing every night in Miami somewhere. My first full-time, the full year, my very first employment was at the Eden Rock Hotel in Miami Beach. Prior to that, the very first gig, it didn't last a year, but it lasted a full summer going into that year. And that gig was on North Miami Beach at a place called the Pirates Cove, and the group was called Shadow, and I was the Shadow. You know what I mean? And okay, so so that was the summer. So it was like, cool, you don't have to get up and make the 8:30 theory class in the summer. But when I got that gig at the Eden Rock, that gig lasted for a year. And I played the Eden Rock Hotel, and when we booked the gig, we had to audition for that gig. David Roystein, same guy I mentioned, was the pianist. And when we auditioned for that gig, there was a meeting. The president of the hotel wanted to talk to me without the band. Okay, this is kind of scary. You do your audition, you do your 4 or 5 songs, and then the owner of the hotel wants to talk to you. So I go into his office, and he, very, very, I guess very classy fellow he was. And he just said, well, we were wondering, Miss Lund, would you consider changing your name? Because the room that I was would be playing for that full year is called the Mona Lisa Lounge or something like that. Okay. It wasn't the main stage where the Smothers Brothers and Jackie Gleason and all those people played, okay? But it was inside this major hotel on Miami Beach. He asked me, would you consider changing your name to Mona? And I thought, and there's no one else there. It's like the band's not there. So I just kind of said to him, no, sir, I really don't think so. Right? So I leave the meeting thinking, oh no, I've lost the gig for everybody. We don't have the gig now because I didn't agree to change my name to Mona. But we ultimately did get the gig, and I played that. So from that point, so imagine 9 to 1, I've got to drive all the way to Miami Beach every night and drive home every night and get up for that 8:30 theory class. And I did that for years. You understand? For years. So when it came time, now school is kind of ending, and I look up and I go, what happened to Pat Metheny? Oh, he left and moved to New York. Well, where is Mark Egan? Oh, he moved to New York. Oh, well, where's Patty Scalfa? Oh, she moved to New York. And where is that? Oh, they moved to New York. Where's Hiram? Hiram Bullock. Oh, he moved to New York. I'm thinking, what is this New York thing? And what is everybody doing going to this New York place? What is it? I mean, I'm a sheltered kid. I mean, I don't know anything about New York. I mean, except for Empire State Building or whatever. I didn't know there was this was the hub of the jazz world. I had no idea. When I listened to music, I was listening to the music. I wasn't listening to where they were playing or where they were recording, And so I made a decision on the very last engagement that I had that was a full year in Coconut Grove, a place called Monty Trainer's Village Inn, which is around the corner from the Coconut Grove Playhouse. It's where I was introduced to Black Broadway. I decided that I was going to make this move. So that's what I did. So in 1978, I moved to New York, and guess what happened? I walked right in to a full-time weekend performance for a whole year at a club on 23rd Street in Manhattan called Jazz Mania. And Jazz Mania, there was a time in New York where there were a lot of loft venues. So you would go to, outside of the Village Vanguard and the Village Gate and all the major venues, there were these loft venues popping up everywhere. And I played Jazz Mania. And I had that gig. I became the house vocalist because there was no term for that back then. But that's where I began to become acquainted. People became familiar with me because I would just hand them the chart and say, twist it in D. In D, and the piano player would go D. You don't mean F. You don't mean B flat. You know what I mean? C. You mean twist it in D?
This is not a blues gig.
Exactly. But it is for a guitarist,
Yeah.
So what happened was each weekend, this Jazz Mania, Mike Morgenstern, who has a venue now in Miami, actually, Mike would hire, he was a tenor player, is a tenor player, but he would hire whoever that player was that was available that weekend. So from Walter Bishop Jr. to Jackie Byard to, oh my God, to Ronnie Matthews, to Kenny Barron, to Don Pullen. Oh, Jesus God. I mean, the bassists, the drummers. I mean, it was like there's a plethora of awesome players. And Ronnie Matthews, did I say him already? And for any given weekend, I would be on the bandstand with these amazing players. So I'd have to walk up and say, like someone in love in A flat. And they go, wait, hold on a second. And how do you want to start? Okay, so that's where I got this thing. I said, oh, I see. So the arrangements would happen right then on the bandstand. I'd go, let's start at the bridge, because I learned that from them. Sometimes, if you're jamming, you don't want to just count every tune off and just go, So these world-class players would have all kinds of tricks in their bag, arrangement, ways of getting in and out of the tunes, And I was a listener. I'm a really good listener. So I started to incorporate those kinds of ways of approaching my arrangements. So the next weekend I'd go, I don't know what I'm going to be with, but let me scribble out a chart on Street of Dreams. Yeah, I like that tune. Well, let me do that, and I'll start with an F sharp 7. That'll be great. No, F7, no, F7, because that'll be easier for them to that, you know, and I would do that sort of thing, you know. And so for that entire year, I worked every weekend with these awesome players. So what occurred? Walter Bishop Jr., another, who, you know, he's one of those great pianists who's associated with Charlie Parker. So Walter Bishop Jr. took a shine to my talent, my little girl, you know, talent, and he hired me. I did a record with him. He hired me for one of my first record dates. Roger Rosenberg hired me for one of my first record dates in New York, and I started getting calls. You know, people would, you know, oh, I got a gig at so and so. You want to make? And then I got this great gig in Harlem that lasted for a year. Oh, with Bunky Thorpe and Don. It was an organ trio, and I can tell you, it was Roland Prince on guitar, and Don Pullen on organ, Bunky Thorpe on flugelhorn, and Bobby Battle from Detroit on drums. And I did that for a year. So I'm all over, you know, I'm going wherever the gig takes me. And, you know, New Jersey, Connecticut, I jump on the bus or jump on the train and wherever. And that's what I did. And I somehow managed to get to have enough work and enough opportunity that I never really, there was never any space and time for me to go and find some kind of a day job, because there was always this opportunity that somehow sustained me.
Working with all those established piano players must have increased your already developed hearing, because Don Pullen is not going to play all the same changes that Walter Bishop Jr. is, even though the tune may be the same. Did you find that you followed them when they went to different places, or did you try to like just stick to what you knew?
This is, you know, jazz is such a wonderful experimental. We're exploring possibilities all the time. It's the nature of the music. There's something so wonderful and diplomatic and democratic about the experience of this music, and to stay open to the possibilities. And, you know, you think you might be on this certain track with a Walter Bishop. And Walter, by the way, I took piano lessons with him for a while. And if not for Walter Bishop Jr., I think a lot of the things that happen in my harmonic construction would not be there in my music. Now, Don Pullen, on the other hand, I think my first gig with Don might have been at Jazz Mania, but when I got that gig in Harlem a few years later, there was no piano anywhere to be. It was all organ. So that's a whole different vibe in itself. And Don was always on the edge, but he was what I call, anybody who's known for their avant-garde or playing on the outside. That's the reason that is Albert Eiler is another example of that. It's because they are so, they come from inside. They come from, you know, the depths of the blues, the intricate, you know, spiritual aspects of gospel music. So when they go out on the edge and they're experimenting like that or expressing themselves that way, it's not some random sort of like, oh, pick a note, any note. It's not like that at all. It's really from a centered place. This expression is an evolution of that simplistic approach that we start with at the piano, C, E, G, triads and what have you. And then you discover the flat 7. Oh my God, the flat 7 is everything, you know, the tritone. My God, the tritone, that interval in and of itself. You know, you could, and actually Walter Bishop Jr. did publish a book, A Study in Fourths, it's called, by Walter Bishop Jr. And the entire book is nothing but all of these things he derived from just playing perfect fourths. And, you know, there are famous tunes that I can recall, like perfect four, like Witch Hunt. You know, that phase of that time in where bebop and modern jazz were kind of at this wonderful precipice and sort of like playing off of each other. There are a lot of things that I got from a Walter Bishop Jr. that are very much a part of how I approach harmony to this day. And then there's Dawn, whose melodic sensibilities are ridiculous. So and they had their own trios. And if you ever heard Don Pullen, which Adams and Danny Richmond, what can I say? So we're talking now, check this out. Everything we're talking about has nothing to do with the singers. I'm not even talking about singers yet, okay? We haven't even talked about the Ellas and the Sarahs and the Carmen McRae's and the Bettys and all that, okay? This is just how the music, I think I was a sponge. I think I still am. I was just absorbing from the masters really of that time. I'm in my early 20s and they're fully realized artists at that time in their careers. And I'm just really taking whatever they offer and happy to be in the mix.
Do you think there's a difference? Well, there's a difference sometimes between instrumentalists and vocalists, but I frequently ask the question of practicing jazz musicians now if there are wrong notes in improvising. And almost all of them say no, like emphatically. And then they may go on and explain, well, let me tell you why. But so my question is, if Miles Davis played a note that sort of perks up your ear and go like, why did he choose that? But he gets away with it. Does a singer have the same liberty to get away with it? Because
that's a great question.
You're putting a word to it, and the word goes with a note that people may expect, but you're choosing a different note, supposedly on purpose.
How? Well, that's a great question. I've never been asked that question. I'm just reminded of someone walking up to Miles Davis saying, "Man, that was so amazing on that record you did with da da da." And where did you come up with that? And he was like, "It was a mistake." The person's like that. And then Betty Carter would always say, when you make a mistake, it's how you recover. Okay?
Yeah.
That's it. That's the answer.
How you
recover.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's Betty's answer. And she's a great singer. Okay, our great Betty Carter. And she would say, it's all about how you recover. Okay, so sometimes it's the mistake that leads you into this most amazing adventure with everyone. If everybody's listening and not judging you for like, oopsie daisy, I think there's certain things that do occur and they sometimes happen from the bottom up. So say I've got this chart, I've written out, I've been playing the tune, and the bass player hits the wrong note. The bass hits the wrong note. Oopsie daisy. Okay, now that has to do with that bass player better know that it's about how to recover too. You see what I mean? Because you can take those kinds of mistakes and they can become this channel, like, when you watch water kind of traveling when there's a flood, and you're like, where's it gonna go? Where's it gonna go? And suddenly, you're down this path that you never saw yourself going. You know what I mean? So I think that's staying open and having really big ears. But as a vocalist, I think that I think it's weirder to make a mistake with a lyric than it is to make a mistake with a note. I do. I think the wrong lyric, if it comes at the wrong time, is like, how are you going to recover from that?
Yeah, that makes people put their drink down and go, wait a minute.
Wait a second. That doesn't go like that. And I love the way, think about it, Ella Fitzgerald on that famous How High the Moon, she goes, yeah. I guess these people wonder what I'm singing. You know what I mean? So
yeah, she got through the whole Mac the Knife without, I think, singing any of the original lyric except maybe the title. It takes some nerve. And
oh yeah. and
I
skill.
I have to fast forward because if I don't get some input on you on these songs, I won't sleep tonight. Um, I wanted to ask you a couple specific things about recent compositions, and from Modern Ancestors, you wrote a song called Flowers and Candles.
Yes.
There's a line about 1 minute in, at least the video I watched, where you sing a downward melodic phrase, and the words are, "In a place where innocence has died." And if my ears are correct, when you hit the end of that line, you landed on the root of the key you're in, but the chord did not. The chord was not what the ear was expecting. It might have been down a whole step, or it might have been just like a thicker chord. And can you recall when you sat and wrote that, how did that happen?
You mean with the chord not landing on the tonic?
Yeah, the note landed on the tonic, but the chord didn't go there. It was different. And then a few bars later, it sort of got where the ear was expecting. And I don't mean to make too much out of this, but it certainly perked me up. It made me like do my head like that, you know. And
well, if you consider the lyric had died, okay. So if I said in a place where innocence had died, so it's like going in a place where innocence had died. So I think that there's something about that emotion or that truth about the word, or the morbidity of the thought of innocence dying. What am I saying there? So perhaps that was the interpretation of my accompaniment to suggest something sonically that had to do with that. Do you understand? It's a sonic implication. So to just have a perfectly beautiful major chord would not necessarily imply that emotion. You see what I mean? You understand what I mean? So yeah, I think that whatever that is you're hearing, I'm trying to hear, because my brother is playing, Curtis is on bass on that tune, and he's playing the fifth. He's sort of like on a pedal tone, and the little boy asks his papa. So I'm sort of on this major and minor thing anyway. So I have to listen to it because I'm not really sure what exactly.
yes, and I wouldn't call it jarring. I would call it, once I heard it the second time, I said, that's highly appropriate, what you did, what you did there. In it. So the other, I'd also like to ask you about Ain't I Human?
Okay.
Yeah, can you recall if the phrase or the upward 4-note melodic line came first?
I believe that the melodic, I tend to write the music first. I might have an idea of what's coming lyrically, but I generally write tunes, and then, because I find the lyric to be the most challenging aspect of songwriting or composition, the lyric has to be undoubtedly the hardest part. I know that Joni Mitchell, for example, writes the other way. She writes her lyrics and then sets the music to that. That tune, I've always loved the cello. I'm a mezzo. The cello is in the range of my voice. I've always loved the cello. And at some point, I had to have one. I must own the cello. So I went out to the closest music store to where I live, and I bought a cello. And just kind of learning about how to tune it, all these things, right? I realized that the cello tunes in perfect fifths, not fourths like a bass, okay? And it's like boom, beep, boom, right? Oh, right. I'm loving that. And I've always wanted to incorporate those intervals in something in a tune. So I knew that I was going there. So that's what I was kind of like, working in composition to me is like, it's like an 8-hour gig. You get up and you start and you go and you just kind of hope that you arrive at something before the end of the day. So this was that. I was just like, okay, let me just really get inside this whole thing. And as I'm sitting at the piano with the fifths and realizing, we have the cycle of fifths, we have all these things we study, right? In theory. So now I'm going, oh my God, this is so, the space, almost the overtone series itself, you can always kind of hear where this thing is infinite, if it's really tuned perfectly. And then all these awful things were happening in the world at the same time. Ain't I Human, the idea is born from Sojourner Truth's famous speech during the women's suffrage movement and the women's right to vote. And she walks in and says, well, ain't I human? I've, birthed your babies and whatever, and ain't I human? And ain't I a woman? And ain't I a woman? And ain't I a woman? As a Black woman during one of the most horrible periods of American history, she's standing there. I think about it sometimes. It's just like, it moves me to think about it. So, we had a lot of awful things happening during the phase of this writing of Fade to Black. And that was one of them. So I've got this idea of the perfect fits going on. And I'm thinking, how can I convey to the listener this vulnerable place that we all live in as human beings, wanting and aspiring to the same things, love, a fulfillment, vocation, employment, stability, home ownership, whatever the heck, but we all aspire to these things as humans. So I was like, how can I take this idea I had? That's when I started singing ba 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 in perfect fourths, and the interval, the fourth. So now I've got this fifth thing going on with the piano, and I'm singing fourths, but it's intentional to stay away from anything that's do, re, mi, fa, sol. It was not about that. And I that's kind of that thing where you have to work at every aspect of this developed art form. And some of it has to do with technique, and some of it has nothing to do with technique. Okay. And this is one where it was very difficult technically to sing that over and over again. It's not easy because our culture, we're trained to hear things in mi, re, do, re, mi, re, do, re, mi, fa, sol. Everything is that scale. So I was doing my best to stay away from that in Ain't I Human. So these are the things that all come together in this composition to tell the story. And I've got the bass, not a cello, because I couldn't get a cello for this record date for that simple thing I was hearing. Matthew Whitaker did a beautiful job on the strings programming, but I had this bing, bong, bong, bong. So there's two bass players on that track. There's my brother Curtis playing arco because I wanted this orchestration. I wanted like 3 contrabasses, that's what I wanted. So I had Curtis, I had my brother just holding down, he's just like holding those bottom notes, and Kenny Davis on the other bass. I have 2 basses here in the studio, and Kenny's on the other upright bass, bing, bong, bong, bong. So this was my way of doing a kind of a condensed orchestration to fit this vulnerable statement that I wanted to make about observation in American society in the 21st century that's not making a lot of sense to me. Mm-hmm. And that's what comes out.
Are most of your these specific songs, I was going to ask about Eye of the Storm also. I'm wondering if you mostly record with everybody at the same time.
Wow. You've been doing a lot of things. Thank you for these great questions.
Well,
Um,
I've done a little studio work over the years, and when I was watching Eye of the Storm, and some of your songs have rubato sections, extended sections, and then you hit something new, something changes. And I was envisioning the musicians trying to play if you weren't there. Like, and that would be very difficult, it would seem.
well, so I have always I've always I record everything I do. Okay. I record every idea I have. And I have for decades. And I've just kind of changed with the formatting. So if it was a 4-track cassette back in the day or whatever it was, a 4-track reel to reel, you know what I mean? And then it became an ADAT, and then it became this and that and the other. So I've always recorded. And in I would say the last 8 or 9 projects of mine, I pre-record. So any idea I have. So I started out using what they call plugins, or those samples that, part of this software, and fake, like they're loops of instruments, but they're repeat and repeat and repeat. And they kind of support your idea, but they don't really play your song. So I got away from that. I got away from borrowing, Bossa Nova 101 and all that stuff, and began to play the drums myself, and play the bass, and play the piano, play the guitar. So I would record that. I would record my drums. I would record the bass. Sometimes it would be keyboard bass. Sometimes I would actually pick up one of the basses. And sometimes picking up one of the basses informed me more so than just the keyboard bass. So if I would do this, I would go, oh my God, I see I get it. That fingering, that's going to be, so things like that occur, and I go back, and then I can advance whatever these concepts are that I have in mind. I record everything. And I became very fortunate to have met a wonderful recording engineer who embraced my pre-records and embraced what someone might call demos. But they were actually the full albums. I would do everything before I would hire the musicians to come in and play. So my musicians, when they come into the studio and we record everything, they've already heard my full album that I've played everything, which gives them permission and the freedom to now insert their own feeling and ideas, because they have an idea already of what I've conceived, you see? And that's why we're rendering these kinds of recordings and these kinds of performances, because the musicians, Carmen, she's made this easy for me. Oh my God, I see what she wants there. Oh, okay, great. So that gives them, they can take what I've written, and because they're the skilled player on that instrument, I'm not, but they actually stay true. And of course I write everything down note for note. So if the tune needs it, I'm going to write out that bass line, or I'm going to write something on the chart, boss simile or something, here's what I want, and you just be yourself. But these are all the different tools that are now part of my particular approach to getting the music to the stage, getting the music to the listener. So what we do is we take my pre-records. Everybody knows, because I've already sent them the printed music. They've got my full album, and they just kind of go, oh, you want me to do? Oh, yeah. And now all these other things occur that I could never have imagined. And that's what's beautiful about this process. And that's what I think, I don't know if my music really translates that way to my audience, to my listeners, and you kind of have to be in the room when you're seeing me play it live. But there's already so much work that has gone into what you hear ultimately. And what my engineer is so wonderful. He'll say, well, Carmen, that's really nice what you did there. You've where I might have had some kind of a plug-in of maybe a brass section or something. And I'll bring in a tenor player, and I'll bring in a trumpet player, and maybe a trombone for the session. But when we get to the mix, he'll say, let's pull up what you did. And let's see if we can take your plugins and somehow I'll mix it with, Wallace Roney Jr. or with Gifton Jellin. And let's see what that sounds like just to have them both. Let's not just mute all that work you've done. You've done all this work. Why should we just mute it? So that's so wonderful to work with an engineer who also is a musician. Do you understand? It's not just about dials and things. This guy's a musician too. So I've evolved over this, course of all these decades as a writer, as a singer, and some of it is a little bit of I'm a little bit in a quandary because I don't understand why the audience wants me to come to the stage and give them Street of Dreams when I've got a Flowers and Candles. Okay, on Eye of the Storm is a perfect example. Okay, Eye of the Storm. My family's from Miami. I'm from Miami. And they were getting ready to see another horrific hurricane come through. And my family just happened to be one of those places on the planet that was devastated when Andrew came in back in the 90s. Okay, my family was nearly wiped out. And all the things that occurred subsequent to that, health issues and all kinds of other things that occurred with my family down there in Miami. So here it is, 20 years later or 30, whatever it is, and there's another storm pending, and it's like I'm in LA going, and I can hear that recall, that they're reliving that nightmare. So that's Eye of the Storm was born out of that, and also what was happening to the country politically. So there were two things going on at that time for the tune. So, but I knew that my concept of this record had to do with modern ancestors, okay? Not the Sojourner Truths, but the John Coltranes and the Miles Davises and the Nina Simones, okay? And the Carmen McRae's and so forth and so on. And everybody else knew that. And I'm from Miami, so I have a huge love and appreciation for every contribution that Dizzy Gillespie and John Opozo created for Latin jazz, okay? So all of these things I'm sort of paying homage to, because these were my lessons. These are my lessons. This is of my time. These are the ancestors. These are the ones that gave me the inspiration to do this. So that's what Modern Ancestors is all about. It's really kind of saying, well, I'm not one of them, but because of them, I'm me. You see, that's a big thing. And I'm not sure if the jazz audience has really evolved along with me that way, because the jazz vocal genre in and of itself has so much to do with music of a time that has to do with 30s, 40s, 50s, maybe some of the early 60s, maybe some of the Bacharach stuff that happened in the 60s, perhaps. So no one really is thinking, what about jazz in 2022? Jazz vocal in 2022. Oh, I see. That's going to be. Okay, fine. You want me to do that? Okay. But what about this? What about the little kid that's hearing jazz for the first time? That's going to say, I remember when I heard that lady, my mommy took me to that concert. How old are you? I'm 4. It's like, what are they going to remember? I don't want them to remember Summertime. I want them to remember Flowers and Candles.
Somehow Scott Yano in this book, he quoted you at the end of your entry here. And apparently you said, I asked the jazz community, the listeners, critics, and record companies to continue to support, embrace, and reward originality. Originality. Yeah.
I'm glad we read that. There was a film that I happened to stumble into, Liza Minnelli It might have been Arthur, but I'm not sure if it was Arthur. But the very last scene, she's in a fur coat, she's the star, and there's like, it's the end of the film, and everyone's Liza, Liza, Liza. And she gets into the limo, and a little girl stops her before she gets into the car. And the little girl says, Liza, and she turns around. Of course, there's this cute little girl. And the cute little girl comes up to her and says, I want to be just like you. And Liza says, don't be like me, sweetheart, because America loves an original. And she gets in the car. It's the end of the movie. Okay. And I'm like, oh, you know, boy, I'm so glad I tuned into the last 5 minutes of that film. But, you know, I think about that. Originality has always been part of the evolution. I was thinking the other day, you know, Miles gave us Funny Valentine, but he also gave us 4. He also gave us Sketches of Spain. He also gave us In a Silent Way. Okay. And John Coltrane gave us My Favorite Things, but he also gave us The Love Supreme. You understand? Yeah. So why can't a jazz vocalist give you, you know, Them Their Eyes, and then God Bless the Child? Mm-hmm. You see? So I really feel like that's kind of where I am with the journey, as much as my history is very much rooted in this vocabulary. I think I should be allowed to evolve as well.
As do I. And I have great respect. You know, I've often felt that every major city in the United States has any number of singers who are blessed with a great voice. But for me, the fact that you write your own music, you do your charts, you put all this effort into it, good for you. It's the best. I'm not sure how to express my admiration for it, but I'm trying. And I appreciate your time today. I guess I'll wrap up. We've been at it for a while, but I wonder, in the eye of the storm, you're saying, beware the calm before the storm, and it's like a warning. So I'm going to ask you if you think of yourself as an optimist.
I have a very positive. I think I'm. The music has informed me, and creativity is a positive thing. This wonderful part of the human experience, our tapping into our creativity. Sometimes I wonder, without really knowing it, the artist has a wonderful perspective, I think, because we come to center stage and then we play to the listener. And I wonder sometimes, because so much of my life experience has been at center stage around the world several times, that I come away with an understanding, this commonality of, you know, cultures may be different, but there's a human condition that's unique to all of us as people. And I wonder sometimes if I'm informed, or if I can see or observe in such a way that allows me this sense of being able to express in a global sense what we all really yearn for in our own life, And that, some people call that clairvoyance. You know, some people say you were born with a veil. You can kind of, you know, look into the future. I don't feel that way about it. I don't. I try to be, and jazz improvisation asks this of you, to be in the moment. You can't play the solo you did last week and expect for the same thing to happen on the bandstand, even though you blew everyone away and you wondered where all of those ideas came from yourself, right? And you're going to get out there and go, I'm going to do this again, you know, and it doesn't happen, right? So there's something about being true to the moment, and music demands that of you. I'll never forget that night at McKell's in New York when I was introducing something from my first album, Good Morning Kiss. I'm about to sing The Lamp is Low, beautiful song by Parrish and DeRose, based on who is it? The composer, the classical composer of oh gosh, I can't think of it right now. Anyway, and he says, so I'm announcing the song, and he goes, and it better be just like the record. The guy yells. I'm introducing this song on the live setting, and the guy goes, it's better be like the record. Oh, so I think that what I am experiencing is a wonderful gift in and of itself. I'm very happy to be encouraged by my mother, and that somehow along the way, the universe gave me what I needed, to continue. And beware the calm. I heard that guy that was impeached twice. I heard him say that once. I heard him actually say that. So I'm thinking, whoa. And that was early on, right? And I'm thinking, well, maybe the storm was January 6th. Maybe this is the storm now. But whatever I heard back then that came out of this concern for my family, that was personal. But I'm here in the world like everybody else, So I think that's what's going on for me, is that I'm looking for ways to really remind us of what 2021 was like when it's 2035, you see. And maybe that's sort of, without knowing it, maybe one of my intentions.
Wonderful. And I did hear a Love Supreme as that tune faded out.
I don't know where that came from.
I was going to ask, where did that come from?
Where that came from? We were just in the tune, and all that had happened, or you know the track, right? So it's like 7 minutes or 9 minutes already, and then I was like, and then when I did it, I said, "Oh, we'll be out by then." We listened to the playback, and I said, "Oh, we'll be faded by then. We'll be out. The tune won't last that long, we won't do that." And there it was. We kept it because it was all part of that thing, And I think that was the most beautiful part of it all, that the modern ancestors and the whole idea of what I was doing, somehow this John Coltrane entered the recording session, whoa. But that's the beautiful spiritual part of what we do.
Oh, thank you. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I appreciate it, and I hope that I know you'll keep doing what you've been doing.
Oh, thank you so much, Monk. And I got to tell you that it turns out that my sister-in-law went to Hamilton years ago, and my brother-in-law actually. So they both studied there, and I like those kind of coincidences. Yeah. And I will be headed to Harvard the end of next month to do residency there. So I'm looking forward to that.
Awesome. Well, your I was going to say that your 50 years of experience should yield all kinds of excellent information for today's students.
Well, let's look forward to that. I certainly hope so.